What would you do if you arrived in a small town as a stranger, only to discover that the pregnant daughter of the sheriff held a secret that could change everything you thought you knew about your own past? This is the story of how one autumn evening in 1887, a simple bonfire gathering in Millbrook, Texas, would reveal truths that had been buried for decades and offer redemption to two souls who had lost all hope. Before we begin, I'd love to know, from which part of the world are you watching? Please write it in the comments. My name is Ezekiel Harrington, though most folks just call me Zeke. I've been riding the dusty trails of Texas for more years than I care to count, always moving, never staying long enough for anyone to ask too many questions about my past. When I rode into Millbrook in the autumn of 1887, I had no intention of staying more than a night or two, just long enough to rest my horse, get a hot meal, and maybe earn a few dollars doing odd jobs before moving on. Millbrook was the kind of town you'd find scattered across Texas in those days. A main street lined with wooden buildings, a general store, a saloon, a church, and maybe 50 families trying to make an honest living from the unforgiving land. The kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business, where strangers were noticed immediately, and where secrets were harder to keep than water in a broken bucket. I was leading my horse toward the livery stable when I first saw her. She was sitting on the porch of what I later learned was the sheriff's house. A young woman with auburn hair that caught the late afternoon sun like burnished copper. Even from a distance, I could see she was with child, her condition obvious in the way she held herself, one hand resting protectively on her rounded belly. But it wasn't her pregnancy that caught my attention. It was the look of profound sadness in her eyes, a sadness I recognized because I'd seen it staring back at me from mirrors and still water for years. She was alone on that porch, despite being in the middle of a town full of people, and that loneliness spoke to something deep in my chest. You planning to stable that horse, or just stand there gawking? The voice belonged to a grizzled old man who'd emerged from the livery stable, wiping his hands on a leather apron. "Sorry," I said, shaking myself from my reverie. "Yes, I'd like to stable him for the night, maybe 2 nights if I can find work. Name's Obie Turnbull. I run the stable and the saloon next door. Don't recall seeing you before. Ezekiel Harrington. I'm just passing through." "Well, Ezekiel Harrington, you picked an interesting time to pass through Millbrook. Town's buzzing with gossip these days." I handed him my horse's reins and pulled a silver dollar from my pocket. "Gossip about what?" Obie glanced toward the sheriff's house, where the young woman still sat on the porch. "About Sheriff Thornfield's daughter Maggie. Poor girl's been carrying that baby for nigh on 7 months now, and she won't tell a soul who the father is. Got the whole town in an uproar." "Maybe it's none of their business." "Maybe not, but when you're the sheriff's daughter in a town this size, everything becomes everyone's business. Especially when the girl's unmarried and her condition is becoming obvious." I felt a familiar anger rise in my chest, the same anger I'd felt too many times when I'd seen the strong prey on the weak, when I'd witnessed injustice masquerading as righteousness. "She's just a young woman in trouble. Where's the Christian charity this town's probably so proud of?" Obie shrugged. "Christian charity's in short supply when scandal's involved. Sides, there's talk that the father might be someone important, someone with a reputation to protect." "What kind of talk?" "The kind that gets people hurt if they talk too loud." He lowered his voice. "Bartholomew Wickham's been mighty interested in keeping tongues from wagging. He's the richest man in 3 counties, owns the biggest ranch, has influence with the territorial government. Word is, he's been asking questions about anyone who might be spreading stories about Miss Maggie." "You think he's the father?" "I think a man doesn't work that hard to stop gossip unless he's got something to hide. But you didn't hear that from me." I nodded, understanding the delicate dance of small-town politics. Where can I get a meal and maybe find work? Saloon's got beef stew and cornbread tonight. As for work, you might try the church. Reverend's been looking for someone to help repair the roof before winter sets in. Or you could ask at the general store. They always need help with deliveries. Much obliged. I was turning to leave when Obie called out, Harrington, you seem like a decent sort. Might want to keep your distance from the Thornfield situation. Sheriff's a good man, but he's hurting, and hurt men sometimes make poor decisions. I walked toward the saloon, but my eyes kept drifting back to the young woman on the porch, Maggie Thornfield. Even her name had a musical quality that seemed at odds with the harsh judgment she was apparently facing. As I watched, a woman approached the porch, middle-aged, well-dressed, with the kind of stern expression that suggested she considered herself a pillar of the community. "Magnolia Thornfield," I heard her say, her voice carrying clearly in the evening air. "I cannot believe you have the audacity to show yourself in public in your condition. Have you no shame?" The young woman, Maggie, looked up with weary eyes. "Good evening, Mrs. Patterson. I was just enjoying the sunset." "Enjoying the sunset?" "Child, you should be on your knees praying for forgiveness, not parading your sin for all to see. I've done nothing that requires forgiveness." "Nothing? You're carrying a bastard child and refusing to name the father. If that's not sin, then I don't know what is." I felt my hands clench into fists. I'd witnessed this kind of cruelty before, seen how quickly a community could turn on someone vulnerable. But I also knew that a stranger interfering in local affairs was a good way to make enemies quickly. "My child is not a bastard," Maggie said quietly, her voice steady despite the obvious pain in her eyes. "My child is a blessing, regardless of the circumstances of its conception." "A blessing? Child, you've brought shame on your family and scandal to this town. Your poor father can barely hold his head up in church. My father is a good man who loves me. Your father is a fool who should have taken a switch to you months ago." That was enough. I'd heard all I could stand. I walked across the street, my boots echoing on the wooden boardwalk. "Excuse me, ma'am," I said to Mrs. Patterson, touching the brim of my hat. "I couldn't help but notice you seemed distressed. Perhaps I could escort you to wherever you're going, so you can continue your evening in peace." Mrs. Patterson looked startled. "I beg your pardon? It's just that the young lady seems to want to enjoy the sunset in quiet, and I thought perhaps you had other places to be." "I certainly do not need—" "Of course not. But sometimes a gentleman's escort can make an evening walk more pleasant." I wasn't giving her a choice, and she seemed to realize it. With a final disapproving glance at Maggie, she allowed me to walk her away from the porch. "I don't know who you are, sir," she said when we were out of earshot, "but that girl has brought nothing but trouble to this town. She's young and in a difficult situation. Seems to me she could use compassion rather than condemnation." "Compassion? She's made her bed and now she must lie in it." "Yes, ma'am. Well, here's the church. I'm sure you have prayers to attend to." I left her at the church steps and walked back toward the sheriff's house. Maggie was still on the porch, but now she was crying. Not the dramatic tears of someone seeking attention, but the quiet, heartbroken sobs of someone who'd been carrying too much pain for too long. "Miss Thornfield," I called softly as I approached the porch. She looked up, startled. I'm sorry. I don't know you." "Name's Ezekiel Harrington. I'm new in town. I just wanted to say that what that woman said to you wasn't right. You don't understand. She's not wrong. I have brought shame to my family." "No, ma'am. You're a young woman in trouble, and instead of helping you, this town seems more interested in judging you. You don't know the whole story. I know enough. I know you're facing something difficult, and you're doing it alone. That's not right." She studied my face for a long moment, and I saw something in her eyes that I'd rarely seen directed at me. Trust, tentative, but real. "Why do you care? You don't know me." "Maybe because I know what it's like to be judged for things beyond your control. Maybe because I've been alone too, and I know how it feels. You seem kind, Mr. Harrington, but kindness toward me isn't wise in this town. People talk. Let them talk. I've got broad shoulders." For the first time I saw her smile, just a small one but genuine. "Thank you. It's been a long time since someone spoke to me like I was a person instead of a problem." "You're not a problem, Miss Thornfield. You're a young woman who deserves respect and support." Please, call me Maggie. Maggie, and I'm Zeke. Zeke, can I ask you something? Of course. Tomorrow night is the autumn bonfire. The whole town gathers to celebrate the harvest and share stories. It's tradition for people to speak about what they're grateful for. I was thinking of attending, but you're worried about how people will treat you. Yes, but I have something I need to say. Something important. I don't know if I have the courage to say it alone. What kind of something? The truth. About my baby's father. About why I've kept his identity secret. My heart began to race. Maggie, if someone forced himself on you, no, it's not that. It's more complicated than that. Much more complicated. Then maybe you should wait until you're ready. I've been ready for months. I just haven't been brave enough. But carrying this secret is killing me, and it's killing my family. My father's reputation is suffering because of me. My mother won't even speak to me anymore. Sometimes the truth does more harm than good. And sometimes keeping secrets does more harm than the truth ever could. She looked at me with such intensity that I felt something shift inside my chest, a protective instinct I hadn't felt in years. If you decide to go to the bonfire tomorrow night, I'll be there. If you want someone to stand with you when you tell your truth, I'll stand with you. You would do that for someone you just met? I would do that for someone who needs it. Why? I thought about all the reasons I could give, my sense of justice, my sympathy for the underdog, my instinct to protect the vulnerable, but the real reason was simpler and more complicated than any of those. Because everyone deserves to have someone stand with them when they're telling the truth. That night, as I lay in my bedroll behind the saloon, I found myself thinking about Maggie Thornfield and the truth she planned to reveal. I had no idea what secret she was carrying, but I knew it was important enough to risk everything to tell it. And somehow, I knew that whatever she said at that bonfire would change both of our lives forever. And Chapter 2. The next morning brought news that would set the whole town buzzing like a disturbed hornet's nest. I was having breakfast at the saloon when Obie Turnbull burst through the doors, his face flushed with excitement and worry. "Zeke, you need to hear this. Bartholomew Wickham's been asking questions about you." I set down my coffee cup carefully. "What kind of questions?" "Where you came from, what you're doing in town, how long you plan to stay. He sent 2 of his men to ask around this morning." "Did he say why?" "Claims he's just being cautious about strangers, but everyone knows he's been jumpy lately, ever since the talk about Miss Maggie started getting louder." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn morning. "What exactly has he been saying?" "That's just it. He's not saying anything, but he's been making it clear that loose talk about certain subjects would be unwelcome." "Unwelcome how?" "The kind of unwelcome that affects a man's ability to keep his job, his land, or his health." I understood. Wickham was using his influence to silence anyone who might connect him to Maggie's pregnancy. The fact that he was now interested in me suggested that my conversation with Maggie hadn't gone unnoticed. "Obie, tell me about Wickham. What kind of man is he?" "Rich, powerful, used to getting his way. Came to Texas about 15 years ago with money from back east, bought up land, built the biggest ranch in the county. Married a local girl from a good family, but she died in childbirth about 10 years ago. No children survived. So he's been alone since then." "Not exactly alone. He's had companions, usually young women who didn't have much choice in the matter." "What do you mean?" "I mean he's got a reputation for taking what he wants from women who can't say no. Daughters of men who owe him money, wives of men who work for him, girls who need jobs and don't have family to protect them. And nobody stops him. Who's going to stop him? He owns half the county and he's got the territorial government in his pocket. Sheriff Thornfield's a good man, but he's just one man in a small town. What about the law? Federal marshals? What law? Unless someone files a formal complaint, there's nothing for the marshals to investigate. And who's going to file a complaint against the most powerful man in 3 counties? I thought about Maggie sitting alone on that porch, carrying the weight of her secret. If Wickham was the father of her child, her silence wasn't just about shame, it was about survival. Obi, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. What is it? If someone were to stand up to Wickham, what would happen to them? Depends on who they are and what they have to lose. A man with nothing to lose might have a chance. A man with family, property, or a reputation to protect, he shrugged. Well, let's just say Wickham has a long memory and a lot of patience. And what about you? What would happen to you if you helped someone stand up to him? I've been thinking about that since yesterday. I'm too old to start over somewhere else, but I'm also too old to keep watching good people get hurt by bad ones. That sounds like you've made a decision. Maybe I have. Maybe it's time this town remembered that courage isn't just for young men. I was about to respond when the saloon doors swung open and Sheriff Thornfield walked in. He was a tall man with graying hair and tired eyes, wearing a badge that seemed to weigh heavy on his chest. "Mr. Harrington," he said, approaching our table, "I wonder if I might have a word with you." "Of course, Sheriff. In private, if you don't mind." Obi stood up. "I'll give you gentlemen some privacy." After he left, Sheriff Thornfield sat down across from me. "I understand you spoke with my daughter yesterday." "I did. She seemed upset, so I tried to offer some comfort." "I appreciate that. Maggie's been through a difficult time, and kindness from strangers is rare these days. She's a good young woman who's being treated unfairly." "Yes, she is. But Mr. Harrington, I have to ask, what are your intentions regarding my daughter?" The question caught me off guard. "My intentions? You're new in town, you're unattached, and you showed interest in a young woman who's in a very vulnerable position. I need to know if you're planning to take advantage of her situation." I felt a flash of anger, but I understood his concern. "Sheriff, I have no intentions beyond offering friendship and support to someone who needs it." "Friendship and support. That's all?" "That's all." He studied my face for a long moment. "You know, Mr. Harrington, in my 20 years of wearing this badge, I've learned to read men pretty well. And I see something in you that I don't see in many people anymore." "What's that?" "Integrity. The kind of integrity that makes a man do the right thing even when it's dangerous. I try to live by my principles. Those principles might be tested here in Millbrook. There are forces at work in this town that don't like it when people stand up for what's right." "Are you warning me off, Sheriff?" "I'm warning you to be careful. My daughter has made some powerful enemies by refusing to name the father of her child. Anyone who supports her becomes a target." "Why doesn't she name him?" "Because she's protecting him." "Protecting him?" That's what I thought at first. But now I'm beginning to think she's protecting something else entirely. What else could she be protecting? The truth. Sometimes the truth is more dangerous than any lie. "Sheriff, what aren't you telling me?" "I'm telling you that my daughter is planning to attend the bonfire tonight, and she's planning to make some kind of announcement. I'm also telling you that if she does what I think she's going to do, it could destroy several lives, including hers. Especially hers." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Have you tried to stop her?" "I've tried to talk to her, but she's determined. She says she's tired of carrying the secret, tired of watching our family suffer for her silence." "Maybe it's time for the truth to come out." "Maybe. But Mr. Harrington, I need you to understand something. If you're planning to stand with my daughter tonight, you're not just risking your own safety. You're risking the safety of everyone who cares about her. I made her a promise. I know, and I respect that. But I also need you to know what you're getting into. Then tell me." Sheriff Thornfield looked around the saloon, ensuring we were alone. "My daughter's baby. The father is someone who could destroy this town if his identity were revealed. Someone with connections that reach all the way to Austin, maybe even Washington. Wickham. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. Mr. Harrington, Bartholomew Wickham is not just a rich rancher. He's got political connections that could make life very difficult for anyone who crosses him. If Maggie names him as the father of her child, she'll finally get the justice she deserves, or she'll get herself killed, and anyone who supports her will be next." I sat back in my chair, processing what he'd told me. "Sheriff, are you asking me to abandon your daughter? I'm asking you to understand the stakes. I understand them. But I also understand that sometimes doing the right thing requires courage, and sometimes courage gets good people killed, and sometimes cowardice lets evil people win." He nodded slowly. "You're not going to back down, are you?" "No, sir, I'm not." "Then God help us all." The rest of the day passed slowly. I spent the morning helping at the church, repairing loose boards on the roof, but my mind kept wandering to Maggie and what she planned to reveal that night. I found myself thinking about all the young women I'd met over the years who'd been hurt by powerful men, all the times I'd walked away rather than get involved. Around midday, I saw Maggie walking toward the general store. She moved carefully, one hand supporting her back, the other resting on her belly. Despite her condition, she held herself with dignity, ignoring the stares and whispers that followed her. "Miss Maggie," I called out, crossing the street to join her. "Hello, Zeke. How are you settling into our little town?" "Well enough. Though I hear I've attracted some attention from Mr. Wickham." Her face went pale. "He's been asking about you?" "According to Obi, yes. Should I be worried?" "Yes," she said quietly. "You should be very worried. Maggie, are you sure you want to go through with tonight?" "I have to. I can't carry this secret anymore. It's destroying my family. But if Wickham is as dangerous as people say, he is, more dangerous than you can imagine, then why risk it?" She stopped walking and turned to face me. "Because some secrets are more dangerous than the truth. And because I've realized that protecting him means sacrificing everyone else I care about." "What do you mean?" "I mean that my silence isn't just protecting Wickham. It's protecting what he represents. The idea that powerful men can do whatever they want to vulnerable women without consequences." "Maggie, you don't have to be the one to change that." "Yes, I do. Because if I don't, who will? How many other women will he hurt while I stay silent?" I saw the determination in her eyes, the same determination I'd seen in the eyes of other people who decided to stand up to injustice regardless of the personal cost. "All right," I said. "Then we'll face whatever comes together." "You still plan to stand with me?" "I gave you my word." "Even knowing what it might cost you?" "Especially knowing what it might cost me." She smiled then, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her. "Thank you, Zeke. You don't know what this means to me." "I think I do." As the sun began to set, people started gathering in the town square for the bonfire. I watched from the saloon window as families arrived with blankets and food, children running between the adults, everyone preparing for what should have been a celebration. But there was tension in the air, a feeling that something important was about to happen. I saw Wickham arrive with several of his men, positioning themselves where they could watch the crowd. I saw Sheriff Thornfield standing near the edge of the gathering, his hand resting on his gun. And I saw Maggie, walking slowly toward the bonfire with her head held high, carrying the weight of her secret and the courage to finally tell the truth. The time for reckoning had come. Chapter 3. The bonfire crackled to life as the sun disappeared behind the Texas horizon, casting dancing shadows across the gathered faces of Millbrook's citizens. I stood near the edge of the crowd, my hand resting on the Colt 45 at my hip, watching as families settled on blankets and children chased each other around the fire. To an outsider, it might have looked like any other harvest celebration, but I could feel the tension crackling in the air like electricity before a storm. Maggie arrived just as the first stories began. She wore a simple blue dress that accommodated her condition, her auburn hair pinned back severely, and she carried herself with the dignity of someone who had made peace with a difficult decision. As she approached the fire, conversations died and heads turned. The comfortable chatter of the evening was replaced by an uncomfortable silence. Bartholomew Wickham stood across the fire from where I positioned myself, flanked by 4 of his men. He was exactly what I had expected, tall, well-dressed, with the kind of commanding presence that came from years of having others defer to his wishes. His eyes never left Maggie as she found a place to sit on a blanket someone had reluctantly made room for her on. "Friends and neighbors," called out Mayor Jameson, a thin man with nervous energy, "let's begin our traditional sharing of gratitude for this harvest season. Who would like to speak first?" Several people shared brief words of thanks for good crops, healthy families, successful businesses, the normal pleasantries that mark these community gatherings. But everyone kept glancing at Maggie, as if waiting for something to happen. Finally, after nearly an hour of polite conversation, Maggie stood up. The firelight danced across her face, highlighting the determination in her eyes and the slight tremor in her hands. "I have something to say," she announced, her voice carrying clearly across the gathering. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the children stopped playing and turned to stare at her. "Maggie," her father called out, his voice tight with warning, "perhaps this isn't the right time." "No, Papa, this is exactly the right time. I've been carrying a secret for too long, and it's time for the truth to come out." I saw Wickham's men shift their positions, their hands moving closer to their weapons. I casually adjusted my own stance, ready to draw if necessary. "I know you've all been wondering who the father of my child is," Maggie continued, her voice growing stronger. "I know you've been gossiping, speculating, judging me for my silence. Well, I'm not going to be silent anymore." "Maggie, don't," her mother pleaded from across the fire. "I'm sorry, Mama, but I have to. Because my silence has been protecting someone who doesn't deserve protection. Someone who has hurt me and hurt other women in this town." Wickham stepped forward. "Miss Thornfield, I think you're overwrought. Perhaps you should—" "No, Mr. Wickham, I'm not overwrought. I'm finally ready to tell the truth." The way she said his name with such pointed emphasis sent a murmur through the crowd. People began to understand what she was about to reveal. "The father of my child," Maggie said, her voice now ringing with authority, "is Bartholomew Wickham." The crowd erupted in gasps and whispers. I saw some people look shocked, others nod as if they had suspected as much. But Wickham himself remained calm, almost dismissive. "That's a serious accusation, Miss Thornfield," he said smoothly. "I hope you have proof of such a claim." "I have proof," she replied, "but that's not all I have to say." She paused, gathering her courage for what came next. I could see her hands shaking, but her voice remained steady. "What I'm about to tell you will shock you more than anything you've heard tonight. The reason I've kept this secret for so long isn't just because Mr. Wickham is powerful, it's because of who I am." "What do you mean, child?" asked old Mrs. Patterson, the same woman who had berated Maggie the day before. "I mean that I'm not who you think I am. I'm not Sheriff Thornfield's daughter." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the fire seemed to burn more quietly. "Maggie, what are you saying?" her father asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm saying that 19 years ago, when Mama couldn't have children, you and she made a desperate decision. You took in a baby girl whose real parents had died in a wagon train attack. You gave her your name, your love, and your protection. You raised her as your own daughter." Sheriff Thornfield's face went white. "Maggie, no, don't do this." "I have to, Papa, because that baby girl grew up to discover that her real father was someone she never knew existed. Someone who had been living in this town for years, watching her, never knowing who she was." I felt a chill run down my spine. Something in her voice, in the way she was looking at me across the fire, made my heart start racing. "Her real father," Maggie continued, "was a man named Jonathan Harrington. A man who worked for the territorial government, investigating corruption and criminal activity. A man who was killed along with his wife when their wagon train was attacked by bandits 15 years ago. The world seemed to tilt around me. Jonathan Harrington, my brother who had died with his wife Sarah on their way to California, leaving behind a baby daughter I had never known existed. "No," I whispered, but the word came out louder than I intended. "Yes," Maggie said, tears streaming down her face. "My real name is Elizabeth Harrington. And you, Ezekiel Harrington, are my uncle." The crowd was buzzing with confusion and shock, but I couldn't hear them. All I could hear was the sound of my own heartbeat and the memory of my brother's voice telling me about his baby daughter just before he left for California. "That's impossible," I said, stepping forward. "My brother's daughter died in the attack." "No, she didn't. The Thornfields found her in the wreckage, barely alive. They were told that all her family had died, so they took her in and raised her as their own. They never knew her real name was Elizabeth Harrington." "But how did you find out?" "Because when I became pregnant, I started asking questions about my birth parents. I needed to know if there were any health issues I should be aware of. Sheriff Thornfield finally told me the truth about who I really was." I looked at Sheriff Thornfield, who nodded grimly. "I never wanted her to know. I was afraid of what it might mean for her safety." "Safety from what?" "From the same people who killed your brother and his wife. The same people who might come looking for her if they knew she was still alive." "Who killed them?" "We don't know for certain, but we know it wasn't random bandits. Jonathan Harrington was investigating corruption in the territorial government. He had evidence that could have destroyed powerful men who had reasons to want him dead. Men like Wickham. Wickham was one of the men your brother was investigating. He had evidence of land fraud, bribery, and worse. When Jonathan died, that evidence disappeared with him. I felt a rage building in my chest that I hadn't experienced in years. "You killed my brother." "I didn't kill anyone," Wickham said, but there was less confidence in his voice now. "I had nothing to do with that wagon train attack, but you benefited from it. You've been buying up land with forged documents, bribing officials, destroying anyone who got in your way. Just like you destroyed my niece. Your niece came to me willingly. She was a 19-year-old girl who didn't know her own history. You took advantage of her innocence and her situation. I took advantage of nothing. She was eager enough for my attention." That was the wrong thing to say. Before I knew what I was doing, I was moving around the fire toward him. But Maggie's voice stopped me. "Zeke, wait, there's more." I turned back to her, my hands still clenched into fists. "When I realized who you were, when I saw you in town yesterday, I knew it wasn't a coincidence. You came here for a reason. I came here by accident. I was just passing through." "No, you weren't. You came here because you've been looking for the truth about your brother's death. You've been investigating the same corruption he was investigating." She was right. I had been following leads about Jonathan's death for years, tracking down anyone who might have information about the circumstances surrounding the wagon train attack. Those leads had brought me to this part of Texas, to this town, to this moment. "So you see," Maggie continued, addressing the crowd, "this isn't just about me being pregnant by a powerful man. This is about justice for my real father and for all the other people who have been hurt by corruption and greed." "You have no proof of any of this," Wickham said, but his men were looking nervous now. "Actually, I do." Maggie reached into her dress and pulled out a small leather pouch. "Before my father died, he hid evidence in a place only his family would know to look. Evidence that proves your involvement in land fraud, bribery, and conspiracy. That's impossible. Jonathan Harrington's belongings were destroyed in the attack. Not all of them. He gave some documents to the Thornfields for safekeeping before he left town. They've been hidden in Sheriff Thornfield's safe for 15 years. I looked at Sheriff Thornfield, who nodded grimly. We always suspected they were important, but we didn't know what they meant until Maggie figured out who she really was. "What do the documents prove?" I asked. "That Wickham and several other men have been involved in a land fraud scheme that goes back nearly 2 decades. They've been forging documents, bribing officials, and eliminating anyone who got too close to the truth. Including my brother. Including your brother." I turned to face Wickham, who was now looking genuinely worried. "You murdered my brother and his wife. You orphaned my niece. And then you violated her when she was vulnerable and alone. I didn't murder anyone. The wagon train attack was carried out by hired men. I never gave any direct orders. But you benefited from it. You've been profiting from their deaths for 15 years. Business is business, Harrington. Your brother should have minded his own affairs." And that was all I needed to hear. I drew my pistol, but before I could fire, Sheriff Thornfield stepped between us. "Zeke, don't! Not like this! He murdered my family. I know, and he'll pay for it, but not with vigilante justice. We have evidence now. We can do this the right way." The right way? How many other people has he hurt while we've been doing things the right way? Too many. But that ends now. I looked at Maggie, who was watching me with tears in her eyes. "Uncle Zeke, I know you want revenge, but I want justice. For my father, for my mother, for all the people he's hurt. Justice takes too long. Maybe, but it's the only way to make sure he can't hurt anyone else." I held my gun steady, pointed at Wickham's chest. Around us, the crowd had backed away, giving us space for what they knew was coming. "Sheriff," I said, "are you prepared to arrest him?" "I am, but I need you to put down your weapon first." "What guarantee do I have that he won't escape, that his influence won't get him out of this?" "You have my word, and you have the evidence. And you have the fact that this whole town just heard him confess to conspiracy." I looked around at the faces in the crowd. They were scared, but they were also angry. They had just learned that a man they had feared and respected had been lying to them for years. "All right," I said finally, holstering my weapon. "But if he walks free, I'll finish this my own way." "He won't walk free." Sheriff Thornfield turned to Wickham. "Bartholomew Wickham, you're under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, and accessory to murder." "You can't arrest me. I have friends in the territorial government. I have influence." "Your influence just died with your confession." "Men, arrest him." Two of Wickham's men moved to draw their weapons, but they found themselves facing not just Sheriff Thornfield and me, but also Obie Turnbull and several other townspeople who had decided they'd had enough of living in fear. "I wouldn't recommend it," Obie said, his shotgun trained on Wickham's men. "This town's got a lot of anger built up, and you boys are outnumbered." The men looked at each other, then at Wickham, then slowly raised their hands. "Smart choice," Sheriff Thornfield said. 6 months later, I was standing in the same town square, but this time for a celebration rather than a confrontation. Wickham had been convicted and sentenced to life in prison, along with 3 of his associates. The territorial government had launched a full investigation into the corruption he had exposed, and several other officials had been arrested. More importantly, I was holding my nephew, Jonathan Harrington Jr., named for his grandfather, while Maggie sat beside me on a blanket, looking healthier and happier than I had ever seen her. "He looks like you," she said, smiling at the baby. "He looks like his grandfather, like my brother. I wish I could have known him." "You do know him. You have his sense of justice, his courage, his determination to do what's right no matter the cost. I also have his stubbornness, according to Papa." I laughed. "That too." Sheriff Thornfield approached us, carrying a telegram. "This just came for you, Zeke." I read it quickly, then smiled. "The territorial government wants me to take over the corruption investigation. They're offering me a permanent position as a federal investigator. Are you going to take it?" "I don't know. I've been thinking about staying in Millbrook, maybe opening a ranch, settling down." "Why would you want to do that?" "Well, because I've spent 15 years looking for my family, and I finally found them. I found my niece, my nephew, and a community that's worth protecting." "And maybe because you've found something else." I looked at her, confused. "What do you mean?" "I mean that Temperance Ashford has been asking an awful lot of questions about you lately. Questions about whether you're planning to stay in town, whether you're looking for a wife, whether you like children." I felt my face redden. Temperance was the town's midwife and healer, a widow in her early 30s who had been nothing but kind to me since I'd arrived. She was intelligent, compassionate, and beautiful in a quiet way that grew on you. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Of course you don't. Uncle Zeke, you saved my life and gave me back my family. The least I can do is return the favor." "What do you mean?" "I mean that tomorrow night, Temperance is coming to dinner, and you're going to be there." "Maggie, I don't think you have a choice. Family takes care of family." I looked at this remarkable young woman who had risked everything to tell the truth, who had brought justice to a corrupt town, who had given me back the family I thought I'd lost forever. Yes, I said, family takes care of family. As the sun set over Millbrook, Texas, I realized that sometimes the most important journeys don't take you to new places. Sometimes they take you home. Did you enjoy this story of family, justice, and redemption? Let me know in the comments which part moved you most, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more Old West stories that will touch your heart.